This is In Between Them, a podcast where we uncover what it really felt like to be a child of divorce. I am Shannon Darrow, and each episode brings honest stories from brave adults who lived through this as children. This is In Between Them. Let's get going.
Thank you, Angie, for being here today. I really appreciate your time.
Oh, I'm happy to be here and excited about this.
Oh, good. Well, I just wanted to, give you a minute to give an introduction of yourself. But I first want to just say that, I met you through like a business coaching and kind of growth minded way. And I truly don't think that I would be doing this podcast if I hadn't been around you in some way, shape, or form. And so I just, you are inspiring and empowering and all of that. And I feel so fortunate that you would honor me with being on this podcast. I'm excited to hear something about your life that isn't about business coaching and is, maybe it is what built you and got you there, but it will be just exciting and fascinating to hear that part of your life. So thank you again for being here. I appreciate it. And if you just want to give like a brief snapshot of how you got to this point, I think our listeners would be really appreciative of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, thanks for having me, Shannon. I love the growth that you have experienced, and I know how passionate you are about this work and making a difference out there. So it's so fun to be in this seat with you now, knowing that the work that you're doing and the growth that you've had is going to ripple out and affect so many other lives, parents, kids, all that. So I'm really excited about our conversation. I'm a mom of two myself, and I've been married for, 28 years now, I think. And obviously, like you said, business, life coach. And I would say, it's funny, we'll probably get into this conversation, but probably how I got here was much of what I went through as a child. I mean, we all go through things, divorced or not divorced, as a child of parents like that. But I think that always shapes where we eventually end up through a lot of wanting to succeed and accomplishing goals and finding value and finding worth in myself. It all led me to this destination, and it's exactly where I should be because I love impacting other people's lives and helping them unpack what's inside of them so that they can truly step into their potential.
Well, I mean, I can only imagine how those pieces were put together for you along the way. But I want to kind of get into your story. And I think that it's like you said, my goal in this is to try and help people understand what they can do better and maybe things that people did well that they hear that reinforces their ability to do well for their children. Something that has dawned on me even more clearly as I have been talking to more and more people is that there are so many consequences to divorce for everyone involved, but the parents can go on and have a new chapter. They can get remarried. They can have more children. They can lead a fulfilling single life. They just have so many choices. But the children really always, no matter what, bear the brunt of that divorce. And it's really up to parents whether they choose to compound that impact or whether they choose to mitigate that. And it's hard because it means what they have to do for themselves. And so my hope and as you share is that there's bits that people can pull that, maybe reflect on their own dynamic. And it's something that resonates with them that maybe they can use to do better for their own kids. So with that, I just want to ask you if you can kind of start at the beginning. How old were you when your parents got divorced, and what do you remember of that time? I know some people are very young, so they don't remember a ton, but how did that kind of unfold to you?
I remember it so vividly but I only remember like a piece of it. And I was about 4.5, maybe 5 years old when I don't know exactly the exact date they like finalized and all of that. But I remember we lived in Florida, and I remember sitting on this old couch that we had in the front room. We kind of had like the fancy living room and the family room type of thing. Not that we had a fancy house by any means, but we were in this kind of formal area, which was more connected to my parents' bedroom. And I remember sitting on the couch with my sister, and we were kind of like balled up because we knew we were snooping, right? Like we were sitting close enough to hear, but it was like, knew you probably shouldn't be hearing it because all it was arguing. All it was
Oh.
yelling and like fighting. And it's like, you're sitting there and you're like, oh my gosh, I just remember the fear of like, what is going on? Like, why is there so much anger? Why is there so much fighting? oddly enough, I don't ever remember fighting up until that moment, so I think that it's
Interesting.
so symbolized, like, this must have been the fight that, like, that called it quits, you know what I mean? Because otherwise I would, like, remember a childhood like that for so long. Granted, I was young, but I just remember that moment and later being like, what my sister and I going like, "What's happening?" And she was probably talking more than I was. I was young, but we were just like, "Why are you fighting? What's wrong?" And just getting that delivery of like, "You know what? Your father and I, we can't get along, and we've decided we can't do this anymore. And so we're no longer gonna live together." And, oh, just remembering, you know, you don't know what that even means. You know what it means, like, we're not gonna live together, but just the heartbreak in that moment. Um, but also I
Right.
think in some weird way, there was a connection of like, well, maybe we don't have to hear this. You know what I mean? Like, in a good way, like, we don't have to hear
Mm,
the fighting because that was the moment that was so traumatizing, like, the yelling and the screaming and the fighting, and just, like, the
yeah.
feeling of, like, "Oh my gosh, there's massive conflict here." That's what stood out to me more than the
Yeah.
actual divorce was just like, "Oh god, I do not like to hear that." That was so unsettling. Looking back now, I didn't know, but, like, it was so unsettling to your nervous system, to hear that and feel like there's so much
Yeah.
instability.
Yeah. And when your parents are supposed to be the stability that is all you know, and you hear that all of a sudden at a very young age, that's rocking that foundation. Let me ask how old your sister, you said she was older. How much older was she than you?
She is like 2.5 years older than me.
Okay. So you both were still, I mean,
Mhm.
6 and 4. Yeah.
Absolutely,
Okay.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
then they kind of tell you that in that moment. Then how does the separation then happen and how are you kind of understanding that? I feel that there are many cases where it was kind of an evolution where especially, we're looking at 20, 30 years ago, people didn't have all these buttoned up judgments that they have now that are really for the good or the bad pigeonholing people into certain ways that they have to live. And so what was that? Was that like, here's our new schedule, or was it a slower adjustment? How did you guys then evolve into two homes essentially?
Yeah, in my mind, it's almost like flash moments of, like, flashes that go back. I don't remember this transition of like, "Oh, it was like this, then it was like this." It was like, okay, we lived in this house for a short period of time, and then we moved into an apartment, because I went first grade at a different school because my mom and my sister and I moved over into some townhouses in a different area. So, we got moved out of the house. I don't know why, I don't know how that came about that my dad's a great guy, but it was weird. It was like we left the house, we went to a townhome, we spent a year there. We would come over back to our old house where my dad lived with a roommate, and it was very just logistical for us at that point in time, like, I don't even remember having a lot of emotion about it. It was just like, this is what we do. At that age, you haven't formed all these patterns of like, "Oh gosh, we're not gonna have family Sunday dinners anymore." Like, you really are just now developing patterns
Mhm.
and beliefs and stories. So it wasn't like it was this huge upset to what we had known or even what I remembered. So it was very much just like here one week, here on the weekends. And of course, each parent took
Mhm.
on a role. Right? Like the mom was
Right.
the very disciplinarian, and that's where I was going to school, and that's where I had all these rules. And then I go to my dad's house, and it was like, we had the pool and we had fun, and it was like fun dad. So for the
Mm.
beginning of time, we eventually ended up moving back to the house a year later. And then we stayed there until really I left for college. It was just like this
Wow.
logistical thing.
Hmm. Interesting. So being 4 when that happened, at some point later, you must have processed more what that your parents weren't together. Do you remember a moment or something that really triggered your awareness all of a sudden that, and, we say that your life is different, but there's so many people that are children of divorce. However, when you are that child, you do feel like you are the only one, even if people are like, hey, there's 7 other kids in your class who are also from divorced families. It just to your point, kids are just not aware at that point to make that kind of process in that way. So was there a point where you were like, "Oh, this is different?"
Oh, it was very aware for me. Like when we moved back to the house and I started second grade and I started having friendships in the neighborhood. And Shannon, I couldn't tell you who, if any other family that had divorced parents. I mean, this was back in, let's see, 70, 8. This is 79, 80, right? So
Mhm.
I literally, like every friend's house I would go to, I was like, "Oh, this seems really nice." Like, I didn't know what it felt like to live with both of your parents and have this, you know, family, this ideal family in my mind at that age, right? I'd only ever experienced, and again, you don't remember 2 and 3, so I
Yeah.
don't remember this family life, but I just remember going to all these different friends' houses and being like, "This is kinda neat." Like, you guys all sit down and have dinner together. Gosh, there's affection, there's not fighting. Wow, like, am I the only one? Like, I definitely remember feeling like we're the only people who are doing this
Wow.
thing, you know? And literally at that age, also formulating, and my friends would even back this up at the time, like, but I get 2 Christmases, but I get 2 birthdays,
Mm,
but you know what I mean? Like, it's amazing how our brain
yeah.
starts to help have congruence and resolution so that we don't sit in a place of trauma. But yeah, that was my first experience is going, nobody else is living like this.
Yeah. Yeah. And to see it in that way, did it create any like did it create any frustration or anger or sadness that became overwhelming, or was it more of, like you said, you kind of went to, well, I'm going to find the positives in this, which are very, 2 Christmases, 2 birthdays is very kid centric
Mhm.
positivity, which makes perfect sense. Was there anything that kind of crept in there that you also felt like you harbored a little bit, or did you manage it differently?
I think, you go through like certain things. It's like if I had to describe it, it's almost like your mind pops into something and then pops out, right? So I had moments of going like, I wonder if we're the reason why. Right. Like, I wonder if we made them fight, even like years later, because that was natural, right? Like, if I had a problem, even at say 9 or 10, and my mom viewed it one way, my dad viewed it another, it caused another argument. Right. So it's like it's natural to think that as a kid, gosh, you make your parents argue. So you'd have these challenges and be like, man, maybe if I was a better kid, maybe if I didn't create the problems, they would still be together. Obviously, like the difference when parents are in 2 different households and they have 2 different approvals, I think that every kid did this. I know I did. It was like, well, let me ask mom, didn't get the answer I want. Let me ask dad. Right. So it was like not having them on the
Mhm.
same page and feeling like, if you got a yes from one person, but then you got your no, your kind of yes was negated. And so it was always
Mhm.
constantly it created this environment of like being hyper vigilant to what was going on. You learn to be really crafty, right? And very
Mhm.
intuitive and learn how to read a room. So yeah, there were definitely moments where it was like, this really sucks. And whether it was when you saw the downside, fighting with your mom and instantly was like, "I wanna go to dad's house," right? Like, I'm gonna be okay over there because they were different personality types.
Right.
Wanting to
Yeah.
move in with my dad, whole 'nother conversation, right? And not that this is divorce, but, like, my mother was an alcoholic. So, growing up in that environment and not having what my dad appeared to be is like that rock, right? He wasn't an alcoholic, so it's like there was more stability, there was just more fun and safeness, and wanting to get away from that. But having my dad, who had gotten remarried and was having kids with his new wife, it was all of a sudden like, oh, well, I guess I don't have space over there because that's a whole new family, which we can explore that topic too. I
Uh-huh.
also had a stepfather come in as well. So at a young age, I had stepmothers and stepfathers come into the picture that kind of took up space in a different way as well.
So I don't want to belabor your mother's alcoholism, but I do want to ask if you ever got any clarity around whether that was a contributor to their divorce or whether that was something that kind of came later.
I think it kinda came later. My dad was in a band, so look, I think both of my parents knew how to have a good time, so that I don't know that that was what it is, my dad will still say to this day, like, "We just didn't see things the same way," We had a lot of fun, but we also had a lot of fight, and that was kind of the clarity that they would give us, and he'd be like, "I love your mom, she's this," you know? My mom would be like, "I love your dad, but he's this," so seemed like it was just not the right fit for them,
Yeah.
honestly.
Which makes sense. And I feel like that whole band, I'm seeing like a movie of like people that get married that live the band life and then they
Yeah.
realize, wait, but so how did they, up until they both got significant others, how did they kind of manage communications? And like to your point, if one said yes, you knew the other one would give you a different answer. Were they aware of you doing that? Would they handle that together, or was everything very separate?
No, they caught on to that pretty quickly, and my mother always trumped my father. So my father could be like, "Yep, absolutely, you can go." My mother's like, "No, they can't." So she always had the final say, which was frustrating. My dad defaulted to her on everything, and if she was like, "You're not going to your father's this weekend," he was like, "Sorry." So there was probably less advocating and pushing because naturally people don't wanna fight, I mean, he battled that bear for a long time, and he would just be like, "My dad's a peacemaker." He's like, "I don't want any problems, and
Yeah.
you'll be fine and work it out with your mom." And I don't mean to say this to make my mom sound, you know, bad or anything like that. It was just personality types,
Yeah.
So it very much like she called the shots and he got whatever she was willing to give him, whether it was a certain holiday or a certain time or the weekends, anything like that.
Yeah. So did that, you mentioned at some point you wanted to live with your dad. What I'm curious as to what point that was at, but also where that fell in your dad being remarried and new children. Did those things happen at the same time or did one happen before?
He got remarried early and had children, so it was after that that really
Okay.
when I was old enough to like not enjoy my home environment, right? And was like I didn't like the volatility. I didn't like, just the instability and the need to be on that vigilant, position. So that was really what drove me to be like, I like it will be better over here, and it just couldn't happen. He had his wife, he had the new, I think we had one sister at that point in time. So there was part of that where he's like, I just can't be the scapegoat, right? Of like you running away from that. And she would have never allowed him to anyways,
Right.
really. But it was just this desire to want some stability. And I think that was kind of separate from the divorce, right? We have the divorce, but we
Right.
have the fact that my mom was a heavy drinker. And so
Yeah.
that was really what we were kind of running from. And even I had a phenomenal stepdad. I mean, a phenomenal stepdad who's probably still, he passed away. My mother's passed away, but like he was such like planted from God in my life and was like such a rock for me. You know what I mean? That even when he would, he'd get thrown out of the house and I would be like, "I'm going with him." You know what I mean? Like, I remember, like, jumping in his El Camino and wrapping my arms around the steering wheel and being like, "I'm coming with you," and
Yeah.
my mother pulling me by the legs and being like, "My dead
Oh my God.
body," So,
Yeah.
there was always this search for me going like, "I just wanna get out of the volatility and the
Right.
friction and the conflict."
Did you communicate that to your mom? I mean, I know um that's a very complicated situation because of one's own awareness and everything that comes with alcoholism and addiction and all of that. But, were you at an age that you could communicate that? Or was this still when you were kind of preteen and just trying to kind of run, for lack of a better way, to say it?
Yeah, no, I don't think you really get that, you know what I mean? I don't believe that you have that cognitive bandwidth and processing and articulation to go, "Hey, your drinking is causing a lot of volatility in the home and it's making me uncomfortable and not feel safe or stable." It's just like, "Oh my god, I gotta get out of the friction." and
Yeah.
it was just it was another lifeline, right? Like, had they not been divorced, you would never think, right? Like, you didn't have any other choice to go somewhere. But because
Right.
it's like you had this other house, you had this other parent, it was like, let's go there. I mean, this seems a lot better. On the weekends, it's really good, like this has got to be better. So, no, not articulated. Definitely, hey, I want to go live with dad,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. Or
not in a
why?
way of like, yeah, hey, this is what I'm experiencing. That didn't
Yeah.
happen until, my gosh, I was in college, moved
I was
away that I could put words around that.
I was gonna say you because again, back then, very uncommon to be in therapy, especially
Yeah.
family therapy,
Yeah.
which would have been where people now would go for something like that. But when you wanted to go with your dad and he said, I can't do that, essentially, what did that do to you? Even if he had very rational reasons, like literally, I don't have room for another person in my house, that still is going to do something because it's your dad saying, you don't fit in this place with me?
Mhm. Mhm.
So, do you reflect on kind of what that trying to almost get, in a way, rescued or in a way safer, and your dad saying, I can't do that for you?
Yeah, I think partly, yeah, it was sad, you know what I mean? Like, we definitely remember feeling like, a little hopeless, right? Like, why isn't somebody going to, save us? Like, I know that sounds dramatic, but, like, give us
Yeah.
a better option. So, but I think honestly, what's really crazy is that even at that age, I think I also knew that it was such a pipe dream. No way, no way was my mother ever going to allow that to happen. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So I think, thank
Yeah.
goodness I knew that, right? Because if she was like, have at it, and then I got told no, that would be devastating. But I think
Yeah.
I also knew that even then my dad was right. Like, he wasn't like, "Yeah, I have a family. I don't have any room for you." A lot of it was like, it's just your mother's never gonna let that happen. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? You need to stick it out. You need to work through it, like moms and daughters fights. I think he kind of played it at a different level than what I really felt like we were experiencing, probably for his own, you know,
Yeah.
reassurances as well. But yeah, I think because I knew that that was never ever going to happen, it wasn't so traumatic to me. It was just kind of like wind out of my sails, and it was like, okay, and it was almost like a little bit of a moment of a fairy tale when we revisit it. 'Cause it was just like, even that little bit of hope felt good
Yeah.
for just a moment, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. So at that time, you had your stepdad,
Yeah.
right? Okay. So, I mean, maybe in a way, your dad felt like there's at least someone there who's is watching, knows that they're okay type of thing. I wonder if it would have been different if your mom had never remarried and was alone with you guys living the same type of life. You just that person who comes in and fulfills that kind of rock, like you said,
Mhm. Yeah.
changes that dynamic for the other person because I feel like, again, adults get to go and like they form new lives. And so when people get, I feel like significant others that are stable, it helps everyone continue with their own lives,
Yeah.
versus that not being a situation. So at what point then did you navigate thinking back to like junior high, high school, or was that kind of this same time frame that you're talking about? Or was there a point when you got really older, when you can process more, when your awareness is a bit fuller on kind of things? Are there things looking back that you think, gosh, if my parents had done this differently, it would have been better for me? Or just ways that you're able to reflect on things that happened that somebody could have made a different choice that would have
Mhm.
changed something. And I ask that from a perspective of someone that might be listening going, I'm living this life. What could I do? What could I change so that my child doesn't feel unsafe or hypervigilant or just all of the things that are building and growing inside of you? Is there something that you would say, yeah, this was the one thing that if they had just done that differently?
Yeah, I would say, and first I kinda wanna address what you said earlier. about having somebody else in the household, and do you think that my father was like, well, he felt good about that? First, I have to clarify, right? Like, never, ever, ever were we in any harm or unsafe, right? Emotionally, maybe, but never. Like, my father would never let us stay in a house where it was like, oh my gosh, she's going to burn the house down. She's a never, ever, ever. And it wasn't like that 24/7, right? So I can also look back on that and go, man, that helped me develop a tremendous amount of grit and resilience because I went through the ringer on a daily basis, right? About the stupidest stuff and the volatility with the screaming or the emotion, whatever kind of was popping up for her. But we 100% had laughter and love and joy as well, and I think that's also why it wasn't this dire situation like, I've got to save you and rescue you. It was kind of like, yeah, shit's going to happen. Sorry,
Yeah.
but like, you're going to be okay. You're going to get through it type of thing. So, um, I think that's important too, because the way kids see it at that point in time, I thought my life was ending, right? Like,
Right.
please
Right.
save me. How can you not save me? Looking back now, I'm like, yeah, it would have been great to avoid the volatility or see my mom passed out or arguing and all of that. But like, it also shaped who I am.
Mhm.
With that being said, I will tell you two things that I wish would have been different. One, I wish they would have had a united front, right? That they would have. We also didn't have the technology the same, right? Like we didn't have cell
Which makes
phones.
it very different. Yeah.
Right. There's no email, right? And we certainly didn't have some big attorney that do anything. So I wish though that there would have been this communication, and I know that they both cared for us as kids deeply and wanted what was best for us, but I wish they would have come together and presented it together as that united front of caring for us. Not, I care for you this way, I care for you this way, and we're going to do things differently and all of that. My father was always like, never badmouthed my mother. Never, ever, ever. My mother and her friends had something to say about him every time I saw him, every time I saw them. So I despised my mother's friends. You know what I mean? And it built up so much anger and frustration. Like, I remember she'd be like, you're not very respectful of them. And I was like such a respectful kid. I'm like, they say bad things about my dad all the time, which was, they weren't even true. Right. And so that's what sticks out to me is like, man, that was really crappy to go through. And I think that even pushed me further away and wanting to be with him is constantly hearing lies or just bad mouthing and just frustration about my dad. And then this whole like ping ponging back and forth on who do I ask, who do I go to, and them not being united.
Hmm. You know, the friends thing is a really interesting thing because I don't think that anyone I don't think parents, and again, it goes back to the layers of emotion that people are going through in during divorce, but then depending on what happens, then what they're living with as they co-parent and what that dynamic is. But I really don't think that anyone believes or understands the massive impact of talking bad about the other parent.
Hmm.
And I think that even with that, parents can be very good about it. But get with in-law or not in-laws, get with extended family aside from friends. But then you get all of that. And so it's your close loved ones who, in this case, your mom's friends came and went, but they weren't like fixtures in your family dynamic necessarily. But if you have your grandmother or your aunts and uncles or cousins or people like that, that are also pounding on your other parent. And there's a tremendous amount of that. And I think that in your mom's case, what the friends don't realize they're stirring up, and
Hmm.
I think that that happens so much because friends transition from like support through divorce to then, bashing the person along with whoever. And it's like the more people that can realize that we could say all we want when we are alone, but when we are in earshot of these children, we really need to respect the fact that that is their other parent and they have their own relationship with them, and that what we say can impact and damage that or backfire and damage our relationship. And so I think that's a really huge thing because that's clearly a very big memory for you and something
Hmm.
that propelled other feelings and other thoughts. And um, I think if parents can understand that those third parties, whoever they are involved, they matter significantly to what is happening to that child in terms of what they're hearing.
Mhm.
It's just like parents who argue in front of their kids, not realizing the impact of that. It's all of that. It's that just real complacency, I think, in a lot of ways, or that just you're present in your own world, but you're not thinking of the impact on the child. I think those two things are huge, and wishing that they came to you with more unity when they did have to, let's say they had to either agree on something or there was something that came up in your life and somebody had to make a decision, would they make you kind of the messenger, or would they have a uncomfortable conversation? Like, what was their interaction if they were ever in front of you somewhere or something had to be decided? How was that handled?
Yeah, it was usually, like, pickups, right? So, like, my dad would pick us up on Fridays to go to his house, right? If there was, a bone there to fight over, then it was like that was when it was happening, And so we, sometimes witnessed that. Sometimes they got along. I remember the moments where they got along so great and we were like, think we can get them back together again, right? Like even after they were already with new people, it's like, oh my gosh, look at them. You guys are laughing together, this kind of thing. But, sometimes it was definitely the messenger piece, or they kind of took care of it on Fridays and Sundays when there was a pickup and a drop off.
Yeah.
So that, and I want to go back to what you said too, because I think this is really important for parents that are listening, is that the bad mouthing the other parent and any of the effects of what goes on when you are under the roof is not isolated to that time frame.
Hmm.
So you live through that and that may affect you when you're there, but when you move out, even later, like I remember there was so much like unease around when I was in college, even when I moved to California and I would come back to Florida and visit, there was this resistance. Obviously, some of it was to do with her drinking, but there was this resistance to going and staying with my mom. And it was like, why do you always want to go to your father's? And I truly, truly believe that when you experience my father created a fairly peaceful environment for us, right? Like we went there on Fridays. We always made a chocolate chip cake or something and whatever. And it was like, it was a peaceful weekend. He never badmouthed my mom. Like it was just, you could breathe,
Hmm.
right? And on the contrary, right, with my mom, whether her sister or her mom, my grandmother was talking ill about my dad or the volatility, anything like that all got associated in the lack of
Hmm.
respect as you get older and you can realize, like, I don't like the way you talk about my dad, right? So
Yeah.
that carries. So even at 35, 40 years old, I'm like, Eh, like, and so I want people to understand that it's not just when you're a child that what happens
Yeah.
during that divorce impacts you. It lasts and we have healed that and she got sober before she died and all of that is great. But I just think it's so important to understand that it's lasting.
Yeah. I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions is that the childhood, as soon as they grow and, like move out, that like it's done, and now you
Mhm.
just get to have separate relationships with your parents. And it's like, no, everything you did to build that now just goes forward with them,
Right.
and again, having that awareness to that greater impact, a lot of times realizing that it might be difficult up until kids are 18 or whenever they end up leaving the house, but you do get this, I don't want to call it a second chance because it is part of the whole, but it is as though you get an opportunity to, like you said, we healed it and she got sober. I've spoken to people who had very distant relationships with one of their parents as a young person, and formed the most beautiful relationships with them
Yeah.
as an adult. And so things will be hard, but the less damage you do gives you that opportunity to have an adult relationship that isn't still kind of mired by all of the things that were difficult, but it's all in the young that is when you're building that and either compounding it, like I said, or making it easier to establish that later.
Mhm.
When you went to college, at what point did you not come to terms, but did you feel like, okay, I'm better with this? Was it a conversation with either one of them, or was it just kind of your own work where you started to see, not that it didn't happen or anything like that, but that you were separate and you get your own chance, to go forward and create your own life?
I think I was well over the whole divorce aspect and them being apart and it being a problem, like probably early on, right? Again, fortunately, I had great step parents that came into the picture that created good new families, right? I was obsessed with my stepfather. My stepmother was great as well. So it made all of a sudden like, oh yeah, this is better, right? And it was good. So I definitely had peace within that, probably at the end of junior high, and going into high school was great. Sure, we still had the, instability and the volatility and all of that. But my stepfather died when I was a senior and I was 17 years old in February and I graduated in June and I left. So I was 17 and I was
Wow.
like,
Bye.
I don't know how many people move away to go to community college, but I did. I was like, I'm going to college, Santa Fe Community College.
My gosh,
Not
that's
many
great.
people pack up and move. I started working at 13. I worked at Chick-fil-A at 13 years old because I was like, my independence. I want to be able to like fly the coop. And especially like once my stepfather passed away, it was like, oh man, today, like the day after graduation, I was like, and guess I'm taking summer classes. I never loved school, but I was taking summer classes at community college. So I had a reason to move.
Oh my gosh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was definitely the moment that I was like, whew, leaving it all behind. And where I feel like I truly, not that I knew this language at the time, but I was no longer kind of like going to be a victim
Mm.
to stuff like that, And I was
Yeah.
just like, oh my God, I finally don't have to like take this or deal with this or tolerate it or anything like that.
Yeah.
And I never looked back. At 20, I moved to California with my boyfriend at the time, who's my husband now. Yeah.
I mean, those are the things where you see that drive from early on, and you see, call it the silver linings, the blessings that come from these difficulties is again, and I knew that so much of your strength would probably come from your story, but you just see it. And it is this weird, I have a personal situation and my son has lived through a lot of this. And I think, gosh, I just hope when he's an adult, he can say, I am like this, these great pieces of who I am because of these things. And then in a weird way, it just makes it not okay, not better, any of that, but creates value around the things you went through versus like you're saying, the people who sit in that victimhood and can't find the good lessons within it, and I think that's, really wonderful to be able to pick those things out.
Yeah.
And amazing that you moved out at 20 with your boyfriend who became your husband. I mean, that's just a beautiful story in and of itself. But I do want to ask, do you see either now or then or, anytime in between, how you approached relationships and how you have approached parenting? Do you see any of the threads from your childhood into that make you more aware of different aspects of that someone might not have had otherwise?
Yeah, I think for sure. And I mean, to touch on what you said about like what that develops you as, like everything I share here, like you couldn't pay me to change it. Like you could not, if you would tell me that I would have like a family life that wasn't unstable and my mom didn't yell, and I would say, no, please, please, please don't. Like just leave it the way it was. I survived it. I thrived it. Like I am really good at what I do because I learned how to read people. I learned empathy. Like I learned how to communicate. Like if I didn't live through that, I would not be who I am. I just wouldn't. And that's heartbreaking to me. I could survive through that, but I would be heartbroken if I couldn't do what I do now. So no way would I ever change it. And it's a weird thing to say because I needed the volatility and the, instability in order to thrive like this. But to your point, I think there's those little things, right? That I wish it would have just smoothed out a little bit, like people didn't badmouth, if people had these night front, like
Mhm.
whatever, it would have made things just a little bit more peaceful and joyful. To your point, as far as like how that has picked up in my parenting or my marriage, I think that it's almost like a subconscious thing, where it's like, I have not said, I believe, let me kind of articulate this correctly. You see your parents do things and you will either naturally follow in that because it's been modeled for you, or you will go, ooh, I do not want that to happen. Right. And sometimes you're very conscious about it and you take certain actions. I've been blessed that somehow subconsciously my programming has just led me to this place of having a marriage that I communicate really well in, right? Like all the things that I witnessed, I definitely wouldn't ever want to see. So I intentionally and even subconsciously go, this is how we're going to communicate, right? We want definitely, I don't want to run into the same issues. And as parents, it's like you bring those same things through, right? I want my kids, every parents have fights, right? Like I've fought with my husband many, many a times. I don't want my kids to see that, right? I don't want them to ever
Mhm.
experience that. I don't ever want to say anything ill about my husband, even if I am mad at him, to my kids. So it's like those things that stood out to me so much have anchored in. And I've made those kind of like the non negotiable because I wouldn't want them to experience that same thing.
Right. And that in many ways has nothing to do with divorce in the sense that you learned it through that, but every marriage has that. So again, you don't have to have divorce in order to not speak badly about your spouse,
Right.
and realizing what that does to your children, whether you are married for 60 years or not, it's a very difficult thing for kids to hear,
Hmm.
and what are they supposed to do with that? Once they hear what they hear negatively about their parent, what are they supposed to do with that? And I think that kind of gets lost on a lot of people is that after effect of not just hearing it and the feeling, but that knowledge now, you know?
Yeah.
So I thought of something when you said that you wouldn't have changed it and it built you, and I can see all of that. What I know is that kids are all very different. And sometimes two kids in the same situation are going to fare very differently. And sometimes not. They're both, and they come out of it differently, but they're both fine and great and they've processed. But I wanted to ask about your sister. So would you say that your sister kind of felt things similarly and is happy and successful in her own life and process things? Or did your sister get impacted in a different way that you've noticed?
Yeah. It's such a good question. And what I know is that we all process situations and circumstances and trauma through our own lens. And what I mean by that is my sister and I could be in the exact same situation, right? Dealing with the exact same thing with my mother, my father fighting and being upset. And she's going to view it through a certain lens and take it one way. And I can take it a totally different way. And that's what kind of shapes how we respond to trauma, right? For her, she became very much of a peacemaker mentality. Let's get everyone not to fight. Let's like, you know what I mean? Make everyone calm, that kind of thing. Like she became very much peacemaker. I, on the other hand, became a little bit more of a challenger. I was not as afraid. I definitely wanted to keep the peace. Like I cared about the stability, but I also wasn't necessarily willing to sacrifice some of my own self-respect or value or worth. So I was a little bit more probably challenger, right? I had a lot of challenger came up and I had a different response where she was like, I'm going to keep the peace and make you happy and do all these things. I'm like, I'm going to get a job and make money and I'm going to move out and I'm going to, right? Like I built this massive
Mhm.
independence and she was very independent too. But I looked at it, I took all that and was like, don't want to be like that. And built my plane, right? Where she had
Yeah.
a little bit of a different lens and was like, let me take care, let me be good, let me get straight A's, let me do all these things. because we experience that loss of what we perceive as love in different ways, right? So I went, I don't need any love. I'll take care of myself. And maybe she
Yeah.
said, I can't speak for her. She said, oh my gosh, I need this love. Let me make everything better. That makes
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah. Yeah. It makes perfect sense. And I think that, I think attunement and alignment and all these words, I think, are newer words that, didn't exist, especially back then, but even maybe 20 years ago. And I think, not to mention all the different ways that we know people function and how their brains work and everything now. But there is something to be said for kids will experience it differently.
Hmm.
And being aware of that is a really positive thing, because you might have a child who is just built tougher, for lack of a better way to say it. And you might have a kid that's inherently more sensitive. And so the same things are going to be happening to them. And if you're a parent or two parents, and to your point of this goes back to unity and why that can be so important, understanding the impacts of these things on different children can help you, the parent, handle it differently. So one of them's going to be better. They can do this, or this expectation for them is different, but this one needs a little something different. If we don't want to break them further, we have to go one step further for this child. And again, I go back to what someone said to me a million times is there's consequences to divorce. There's no escaping the consequences to divorce. And realizing that and being able to accept that and then going, I need to do the best I possibly can for my children. What does that mean? And sometimes some of that might just mean I need to understand who they are a little bit better in order to know how to do this better for each of them, not them as one. And so I think
Yeah.
it's a great example of, like you said, you guys are just seeing the same things through different lenses. And I think that that's a level of awareness that people might not have in the world in general, let alone in all of that chaos for their children. And so I think that's a great thing to point out that we need to look at each as an individual. Go ahead.
There's something so important around what you're saying right there, right? It's looking at them as an individual, but also here's what I believe makes the biggest difference is the perceived message they're receiving. What
Mhm.
are they receiving by this turbulence, by this separation?
Mhm.
That's what shapes a lot of who they are, depending at the age, right? The
Right.
message I received was, it is not safe. There is no stability. You need to take care of yourself, right? And so
Yep.
every kid is going to interpret it on their own. And if
Mhm.
parents just made sure that they communicated the message instead of leaving it up to the kids to decide what it is, then you can totally shape their development through that. But one kid may go, oh
Yes.
my gosh, I'm the reason, I'm the problem, I need to be better. One kid may go, oh my gosh,
Yes.
I need to be quiet. Oh my gosh, I need to be wild and make a scene. Every single child going through that, their mind is going, what is your role in this? What is the message you're receiving? And how do you respond to this message to fix it and protect
Yeah.
yourself?
Yeah.
And if
Yeah.
parents just could say, which some of them do now, right? And I remember, specifically going, you know, it's not you guys. It's not your fault. You didn't do anything wrong, right? As simple as it is,
Mhm.
like that's
Yes.
going to send a certain message, right? Then saying,
Right.
we just couldn't figure it out. We did it. I got this message I shared with you at the beginning of the podcast, right? That they just couldn't get along. They couldn't figure it out. So that didn't tell me that I had a problem with me, but it told me
Mhm.
that nothing's last forever,
Right.
right? And
Yeah.
that you don't necessarily rely on other people and you don't put your trust in them because it could all just go poof.
Yeah.
Right? So that's
Yeah.
what's I think so important is like if parents said to kids if they're at the right age, like, what are you taking all this as? Like, what is this sending you a message of? How are you
Yeah.
interpreting it? What kind of story is this bringing up for you in your mind?
Yeah. I mean, someone said to me a long time ago, when kids have gaps, who knows what they're going to fill it in with? And I think
Mhm.
that parents, they don't have to give too much information, but they need to give some information. They need to be talking. They need to, But I mean, as you can probably imagine and attest to, people have to be somewhat vulnerable in order to talk to their kids in that way a little bit. And I think
Yeah.
that, again, there's so much in that. But if they could understand the bigger picture, that if I don't say anything, my kid is making up something and I have no idea what that is. And I might not know how that plays out for 25 years. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I think that
Mm-hmm.
that's a huge, I think that's a huge piece for people to understand is it doesn't take actually a lot. You don't have to have this big therapy session, but
Mm-hmm.
you have to just confront something and just make sure
Yeah.
that like, hey, we're just we're just kind of checking in with each other. We're saying what we think, we're saying what we know. I want to know what you're thinking or if you have a question. It's not that hard and it's just really taking that time to do that.
Yeah, it
Yeah, I
really
think that's a
is.
really big thing.
And I think we have to give parents credit
Yeah.
too, right? Like, first of all, it's evolved a lot. That language was
Mhm.
non-existent back then, right?
No.
And
Yeah.
they didn't have the same therapy was not a thing, wasn't something that our family would have afforded anyways. So it's like it's kind of like, they did the best they could with what they had type of mentality. Now there's so many resources, right? Your
Mhm.
podcast being one of them. There's so many ways that parents can understand how can I hold space for them, right? There was no
Mhm.
there was no space for the parents long ago, right?
Right.
They were just like, I just got to deal with my own crap and you're just along for the ride. And they didn't
Yep.
even necessarily really care, like, how does this make you feel? What are you thinking? What's going on? And taking that time because they
Yeah.
were just so stuck in their own stuff. But
Yep.
now we have so many different resources and so much language out there that if parents can just go like, yeah, I'm in my own little like tornado over here and I can give my kid just even this small amount of space to hold for
Mhm.
them and process with them, I think we're going to have much different outcomes.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I want to wrap this up with one lighter question
Yeah.
because, goes in and out of just really deep and informative and wonderful. So my question has nothing to do with any of this. It is just, what is your most recently read book that you think is great?
Oh gosh. Most recent.
Or just any book you think is great.
Well,
It doesn't
here's
have
the
to be
thing. I'm
recent.
I'm stretching because I'm reading 2 books that rereading them that I read a long time ago, but I just love them. Untethered Soul is a great one. We've talked about that, haven't we?
Yep.
That's a great
I've
one.
read it.
And
Yeah. It's
then
fantastic.
Chasing the Lion.
Oh, that sounds fantastic.
Yeah, it's a god, like, go after big dreams. If your dreams aren't big enough, then they don't involve God and all this stuff. So that's a great book too. So
Wow.
those are both kind of in my space right now.
Well, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
And just thank you so much for your story, for being, you know, vulnerable to share it. I do believe that it will begin to change the way that people are doing this for kids and just the more people know. And I think that hearing it from your perspective at that time is so valuable to cutting through the fog that people have. So I just from the bottom of my heart, I want to thank you and just, know that you've contributed to something that will change future kids' lives. And that's a wonderful thing.
Shannon, thank you so much for doing the work and for holding the space for people. It, it's good to come back in and kind of revisit this. It's stuff that you don't think about. It happened so long ago. So I appreciate you holding that space and
Yeah.
using the information for good.
Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks.
Thanks for tuning in. Together we can shape healthier paths for families to do divorce better. See you next time on In Between Them.